the Ascends at Boston Avenue podcast. My name is Philip Boone. I am the Mid-High Director here at Boston Avenue. And today I am joined by Reverend David Wiggs, the Senior Pastor at Boston Avenue. David, how are you doing today?
Doing all right, Philip. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. We're discussing the Judicial Council's ruling today. But before we get what the Judicial Council decided this past week, can you tell us about what preceded this Judicial Council ruling?
Sure, Philip. Not to go into too much detail, but in 1972, there was a sentence added to the United Methodist Book of Discipline during a general conference that said that homosexuality is incompatible with Christian teaching. And from that point on, every 4 years, there's been debate and discussion about how the United Methodist Church is going to treat people in the LGBTQ community. And different things have been added and argued and debated over the years until at the 2016 General Conference, the debate became very angry and, in a sense, hate-filled, and they suspended debate and asked the bishops to figure out a way forward. And they put together a commission to do that. That commission brought reports to a special called General Conference that the bishops convened in 2019. And at that conference, the One Church plan was proposed by a majority of the bishops. It ended up being voted down and replaced by what has become known as the Traditional Plan, which was supported by a minority percentage of delegates from the United States, but combined with delegates from other countries. They became the majority and got just over 50% of the vote for the Traditional Plan, which is much more restrictive or punitive or attacking policy or plan in regard to how we would treat LGBTQ people. So at the end of that General Conference, 2019, at the end of February, there were requests made to the Judicial Council, which functions like the Supreme Court for the U.S., but for the United Methodist Church, it's called the Judicial Council. 9 people elected at a previous General Conference were asked to look at whether or not what was passed at General Conference 2019 was constitutional based on the Constitution of the United Methodist Church.
What is the role of the Judicial Council in the Methodist Church?
So they serve as the judicial branch. So the United Methodist Church is organized very similarly to the United States government, where there's a legislative branch, an executive branch, and a judicial branch. Our bishops serve as the executive branch. The General Conference serves as the legislative branch, and then the Judicial Council serves as the judicial or Supreme Court kind of group that rules whether something's legal based on our discipline or fits the Constitution as it currently stands.
If you were to give a synopsis, a very short synopsis of the Judicial Council's decision, what would it be? What is the overview of what they decided?
They ended up ruling basically that about half of the things that were passed at the 2019 General Conference were constitutional, and about half of them were unconstitutional. Again, remember, this is the Constitution of the United Methodist Church, not the U.S. Constitution. So based on our own rules, can some of these things be changed or added without it being a constitutional amendment?
There were a lot of amendments that they were voting on. What can you get a little more in depth about certain amendments that maybe were deemed legal or deemed illegal?
Sure. So since the presenting issues fall around how are we going to treat people who are in the LGBTQ community, the Book of Discipline has used the phrase self-avowed practicing homosexual to identify that group. So one of the things they did was make the definition of how you decide if someone is a self-avowed practicing homosexual. What are the criteria? So there were some criteria added to make it easier to charge somebody if somebody was attacking basically someone who might be in the LGBTQ community, it makes it easier based on some new criteria in terms of the definition, where before basically you had to have a wedding license to say that somebody was openly self-avowed practicing homosexual. I mean, there's some other things they changed too in terms of clergy who are candidates trying to go into ministry, and what kind of questions can be asked that person, what kind of investigation can be done of that person's personal behavior. There were a whole number of issues dealing with bishops. Many of those were found illegal or unconstitutional. The way that part is structured, it does change some of the criteria for the Board of Ordained Ministry in terms of approving people as candidates for ministry. It changed some of the ways that complaints, so if someone files a charge against somebody either for being in a same-sex relationship and or a pastor having conducted or officiated at a same-gender wedding, some of the rules about how that works have changed also. And then perhaps one of the bigger things that changed is that will take effect immediately. All those things we were just talking about don't take effect until January 1, 2020 in the U.S. and a year later in the conferences for Methodism outside of the U.S. But one of them, they said, takes effect immediately, and that had to do with the exit provision. If a church or a group of churches want to leave, there's a new path outlined for that happening that takes effect right now because the ruling just happened, and they said it takes effect immediately.
It probably differs amongst churches, but if a church decided, or if a church wanted to decide whether or not to leave, do you know how they would go among deciding that?
Right. So this provision sets up a requirement that their official board or church council, 2/3 of the people the whole church has to be invited to what's called a church conference that would be convened by their official board or their official council. 2/3 of those present would have to vote to disaffiliate from the United Methodist Church or to exit the United Methodist Church for that process to continue. Then after that, there's a negotiation process that has to be done with the conference board of trustees. And then finally, there has to be an approval at the following annual conference for whichever annual conference that church is in. And there has to be a majority vote that allows that church to leave.
If you had a crystal ball right here in front of you, what do you think this means for the United Methodist Church going forward? What do you think will end up happening with the United Methodist Church?
There's a great deal of discontent within the United States among United Methodists. Majority of United Methodist delegates from the United States voted against the traditional plan. Some people say 66%. I think it's closer to 80% when you look at the numbers, voted against the traditional plan. But because we're a global church, the majority of voting delegates voted this in. So what I believe is going to happen is that the structure is going to change, and the church, if you will, in sort of slang language, is going to split, and there will be some different expressions of Methodism besides United Methodist Church in the U.S.
So you believe that the churches that leave will not just become independent, but might form another form of Methodist denomination?
Yes, I think there might be some individual churches for one reason or another that leave that are on the progressive end or on the conservative end and try to exit by themselves. I think it's more likely, though, particularly among the moderate and progressive churches, that they organize together and try to negotiate some kind of division within the United Methodist Church and become a new or a fresh expression of Methodism in the United States, and possibly others. For example, in Germany, their bishop and their leadership council made a declaration just very shortly after the February General Conference that voted this plan in, that they were not going to abide by these new provisions. And so that whole conference, the bishop, the leadership, that whole conference said, we're not going to abide by that. So clearly there's already some division happening. How that gets handled is yet to be determined. I don't think anybody knows for sure how that will play out when there's large sections of Methodism openly resisting or saying we're not going to cooperate with the new plan that's been put in place by a majority of the delegates. But in the U.S., I think for sure there will be, there's already attempts underway to organize people who would like to be in a different expression of Methodism besides the traditional plan that the United Methodist Church just voted in.
The progressive and centrist churches are meeting together and to decide what they're going to do going forward. Can you tell us what's going on, what's being discussed, and what's going on in the near future to decide where we go?
Sure. There's already been a number of small meetings around the country of people discussing how to respond who felt like that this plan was punitive and exclusive and frankly unchristian in terms of how it suggests we treat people. From those meetings, there's two major conferences coming up. One, May 17 and 18 in Minneapolis called UM Forward. That's being organized to be centered particularly and led by people of color and people in the LGBTQ community. Most of the people helping organize that have been part of resistance, if you will, the resistance movement within United Methodism against the discrimination against LGBTQ plus folk. So that's going to happen a couple of days later, beginning May 20th in Kansas City. There's what I think will be a larger meeting where 10 people from every annual conference in the United States have been invited to come and discuss how there might be a movement for a fresh expression of Methodism outside of the United Methodist Church. So both of those are going to happen in May of this year. The next General Conference is in May of 2020. So basically there's a 12-month or 11-month window here where there's a possibility that some of these restructuring steps could be taken and some negotiation done before that General Conference that would involve several wings of Methodism, from the conservatives to the moderates to the progressives, to try to figure out if we can come together in an understanding of how we might proceed, even if it's not in the same denomination.
Can you talk about the different positions on leaving versus staying and fighting the traditional plan? Because we're trying to decide which one is best to do, and some will want to leave and some want to stay and continue to fight. What are the different positions?
Okay, so there are people whom are often lifelong United Methodist or highly committed United Methodist who feel like that there's a group who are now, at least at this last special general conference, had the majority of votes, that are trying to kick them out of their church and trying to change some of the basic understandings and philosophy and theology and style of ministry of their church, and they do not want to leave, so they want to continue to try to elect delegates that are more progressive and try to win a majority of the vote at the next general conference as a way to move the church in a more progressive direction.
The next general conference, which is coming up in 2020, will there be another, like, how exactly does it work? Will there be another vote, or do they have to argue about it for another 2 days? And how exactly would that work?
I think for sure there will be more votes. Anytime you're in a situation where groups are polarized or you have basically a 50-50 split in those who are voting, you have a large group of people who have just lost something they care about. I think to imagine that some of those people will not want to bring legislation and have an ongoing discussion about this is naive. We've been discussing it for 40 years. I don't think this vote was the last vote. I don't think this settled things from now on. There's definitely a lot of contentiousness still, very much alive within the ranks of United Methodism. So there is a group who would like to go and argue and vote and fight about that some more from the progressive side. Some of the traditional plan leadership have already stated that they're writing legislation to make this even clearer, to help us be more faithful to our covenant and to close any loophole that any person that might be gay who's already a minister who would like to be a minister be excluded, that any pastor who wants to be in ministry with LGBTQ people or love LGBTQ people in any way through a ministry, that all that would be eliminated. So I think for sure there's going to be legislation and petitions submitted around this topic, around this issue in terms of how we treat folks. That is coming for the May 2020 legislative session. So I think that is for sure going to happen. So though some people believe the best path is for progressives to stay in that fight. The other group, which just for full disclosure, the group I am in terms of where I would place myself in terms of how to proceed, is that the General Conference has become a dysfunctional system. And the fact that we've been fighting about this for 40 years and spending millions of dollars every time we get together and accomplishing less and less in terms of ministry or outreach demonstrates that our system is broken. And it's unrealistic to expect that the same system that's been languishing around this for 40 years is somehow going to miraculously change in 2020 and fix this. I think there has to be another way to do that. My belief is a fresh expression of Methodism growing out of progressive constituents of United Methodism in the U.S. Is the more productive way to go.
My thought is, for 49 years, we've been discussing and fighting and arguing, and it's hard because how many times can you tell people to be patient? It's like 49 years is a long time to be patient. So it's hard to say, just keep waiting, even though you've been waiting almost 50 years.
Right. And I think for so many people, the last General Conference, which was called particularly to discuss all of this and to find a way forward, when there was a plan that was offered which allowed freedom of conscience for pastors and for local churches, and that was voted down as not restrictive enough and without enough repercussions by those who supported the traditional plan. I think that made it clear to a lot of people that those who support the traditional plan really are not interested in staying together as United Methodist. They clearly want anybody who has any kind of progressive thought about this out of the United Methodist Church. So I think that woke up a lot of us who believed, we can just talk about this and we can love each other and we'll include everybody's perspective and give it some more time. I think it became very clear that was a failed strategy and an unrealistic belief in terms of what's going to happen going forward within the United Methodist denomination.
A lot of people have woken up because of 2016 and 2019 General Conferences.
I believe so.
And it's interesting because going into the special called General Conference in February, they were talking about how it was going to be a decision. This is going to be the decision going forward. However, no matter which plan was actually decided, it was going to continue to be an argument. If the one church plan had been voted in, or even the simple plan or a different plan, the traditionalists would have wanted to argue and to continue the fight.
Well, in fact, they had a plan to exit already in place, believing that they probably weren't going to be the majority. When they became the majority, when the voting was sorted out, of course, they're reconsidering whether or not to exit. But I'm not sure that some of those churches don't want to still leave the United Methodist Church, because this the LGBTQ issue is really the presenting issue or the hot button issue, but it's really raised a whole series of issues around structure and overhead cost and design of how we make decisions and the size of our boards and agencies and the bureaucracy that we have become. Just one example is that there's over 4,000 different statements in our Book of Discipline now that says a local church shall do X, Y, and Z. There's no way any local church abides by all of those. It's, for the most part, people couldn't even tell you what they are. But even if you had them all, there's just no way to abide by all of that and get any ministry done in your own local context. So I think there's a whole series of issues now that have been presented that are also fueling the possible division into different expressions of Methodism.
There are a lot of exciting parts of a fresh Methodist expression, but what are the concerns, complicating problems that accompany that?
It is very complex, and there's a lot of complicating factors from what you do with how you decide what property's worth and who gets the property, and if a local church is going to leave, do they have to pay the conference for that property? Because previously, the way the trust clause reads, all the property's really in the hands of a conference or of the denomination. But beyond that, then you have the whole issue of, will we continue to have bishops? And if so, how many bishops, and how that all unfolds. You also have United Methodist universities in the hundreds across the country, and who do they affiliate with or connect with, and who helps fund them, and who makes decisions about their leadership. You also have 13 United Methodist seminaries that are in a very similar boat to the universities. So trying to figure out, you're really talking about hundreds, maybe thousands of jobs of people that are part of the structure of the United Methodist Church that would be affected, and how legally you figure out who has a job, or how you figure out financially who gets supported or which salaries get paid. It really does become very complicated. One additional factor is that a lot of our institutions have endowment funds. And so if there's going to be a division of loyalty or alignment, you have to figure out also who gets to take the money, or how does the money get divided up. And so you just think about all those issues, and it's clear that there's a lot of legality and complexity. Even if everybody agrees this is the best strategy or the best path forward, how you actually sort that out is really very complicated.
It sounds very challenging, and like it'll take a long time to figure out. Should we expect to be patient for all of this to work out?
Clearly, we'll have to exercise some patience. I think, though, the outlines of this could happen, and as I said earlier, I think there's this 12-month window between now and the next general conference. That's probably the most effective time to sort this out. It's on everybody's mind. It's ripe. There's a lot of energy. So I think if some of the groups can outline a plan, and then the groups who are in different segments of the church in terms of their position on all this can get together and talk about this ahead of the general conference, I think it's much more likely the general conference can do something productive in May 2020 rather than waiting till then to discuss it further.
Would you like to give as a church, as Boston Avenue, what is our stance on this? What are we going to continue to do as this issue is at the forefront?
Yes, our leadership is very clear that the tone or the spirit of the traditional plan in terms of using mandatory punishments or targeting a single group of people as somehow different than all other people that should be punished or excluded differently than all the rest of us is contrary to how we understand our Christian faith and how we have practiced ministry at Boston Avenue. So I have not violated the Book of Discipline, nor have any of our pastors. But we have been in ministry with the LGBTQ community for decades, and we will continue to do that. Anyone who's seeking a relationship with Christ and believes that Boston Avenue Church might be a place they can do that will be welcomed, and we will walk with them on their spiritual journey, just as we do anybody that comes, despite any labels or any exclusions that the Book of Discipline might be being written or included at this point. I think we do have some obstacles yet to cross in terms of how our pastors function in full ministry with people around same-gender weddings. I think that's still to be determined, and we're working on that. How we support people who are candidates for ministry or leaders in our church who might be wanting to move into ministry that might be excluded by some of this new language that the traditional plan is presenting. I think that's still to be worked out, but I believe we'll be working on that and find ways to move forward around that. I think the best way for that to happen for us, if it can happen, is to be with a group of churches who all want to move in a more progressive direction, and we have a mass movement. I think that's a stronger and clearer witness of Methodism and our theology and our way of doing ministry that John Wesley would be proud of as our founder, and it would be very compatible with the spirit of ministry Boston Avenue has exhibited for years and years.
Excellent. Do you have anything else that you would like to add on this issue?
Well, I think what I would add is that it's very unfortunate that we have allowed our denomination to get to this point where our most public witness to the world is that we are fighting and condemning each other and condemning other people. I think that is a terrible witness to the world, and I think it's just a sad day that this is where we have ended up at right now. I hope that Boston Avenue's voice is clear, and I hope our witness is becoming ever clearer. We have had LGBTQ pastors at this church in years gone by. We have LGBTQ people in leadership currently. We are trying to learn more and more about how we can be a welcoming body for anyone who's seeking to grow in their spiritual journey. So hopefully we are, in a way, kind of distinguishing ourselves and our ministry from the larger movement of Methodism or the United Methodist at this point, and we'll continue to try to do that.
Thank you. And I want to end with saying, to all of my LGBTQ plus siblings, I am sorry. I'm sorry that the church continues to hurt you. I'm sorry that the church refuses to see you as a child of God. I am sorry that the church continues to use the Bible as a weapon. I am sorry that the church refuses to abide by one of John Wesley's rules, do no harm. I'm sorry that so many UMC members refuse to read the scriptures while using reason. I'm sorry that some people pick a couple Bible verses but ignore so many others. I'm sorry that people don't read the Bible in the cultural context that it was written. I'm sorry. Allies, be sure to listen to your LGBTQ plus friends. Don't only make sure they're at the table, make sure they're at the front of the table, leading the conversation. And everybody is invited to God's table and should be at the table because we are all children of God. Let's all work together so we can truly be a part of a church that has open hearts, open minds, and open doors. Talk to you next time. Thanks.